Well, welcome. We are delighted to welcome you all this afternoon to this wonderful presentation on the renowned author Stephen Crane. The title will be Jersey Genius from Pennington to Posterity. I'm Gretchen Overheiser from the History faculty at the Pennington School and also the director of our Archives and Special Collections program. And I'm a former board member at the Hopewell Valley Historical Society. Our talk today is co-hosted by the Hopewell Valley Historical Society. We have President Bob Warsnack with us. Bob, you want to stand up and thank you? As well as the Pennington Public Library. And we have Director Kim Ha with us, and she is running our Zoom today. We have a substantial Zoom audience today of almost 100 people. If you are joining us on Zoom, please use the chat feature if you have questions or issues, and Kim will be able to manage that chat for you. For our in-person audience, I want to welcome you to the beautiful Wesley Forum. And I also would like you to know that bathrooms can be found through the entrance doors, straight down the hallway past the elevator and to your right. Please help yourself to coffee and water and treats, and please have some after the lecture as well. So I am thrilled to introduce Eric Lubell, a Hopewell Valley resident and board trustee with the Hopewell Museum. Eric has spent over 40 years in his career as a writer and creative director in the audiovisual industry, with work showcased in museums around the world, many writing credits to his name, and was the editor-in-chief of The Independent, a journal for Princeton, where he published essays, criticism, and fiction by Princeton alumni for the university community. This is going to be a very exciting talk today, and without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Eric.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Gretchen. Thank you all for coming out today. Writer Stephen Crane went to school here at Pennington in the 1880s, starting at age 13, and he left at age 15. What I want to do today, in part, is to try to understand what that adolescent mind derived from his Pennington education, to become, by age 24, widely regarded as one of the greatest American writers of the 19th century. I want to first recognize some people, and it starts with my sponsors at the Hopewell Valley Historical Society and the Hopewell Museum: Bob Warsnack, Bob Lawless, Doug Dixon, Joe Klett, Larry Kidder, and Asher Lurie. You guys are fantastic. Thank you very much. Thanks to the Pennington School's Gretchen Overheiser. Gretchen blazed the way from beginning to now. Thank you, Gretchen. And thanks goes to her colleague, tech whiz Ken Coakley, who synchronized the bell, the whistle, the zombie buffer, and today's Zoom. Hello, my friends. And special thanks to the head librarian of the Pennington Public Library, Kim Ha. Kim, you went above and beyond to sponsor this talk and collaborate with me. I'm fortunate to have worked with you, and we're all fortunate to have you as a neighbor. Thank you. And it wouldn't be complete, literally and literarily, without my gray eminence, Diane Crumry. Now, in the flurry from the hooves of horses pulled suddenly to their haunches. That's Crane. We're off. Stephen Crane is known for writing an immortal classic, the only novel about the Civil War that still matters. And when he wrote it, he'd never seen a war or even visited a battlefield. Crane penned over 100 stories and novellas, many still taught today. And Ralph Ellison, author of The Invisible Man, said that Crane influenced not only Hemingway, but also most modernist writers of the 20th century, including himself. And if that doesn't testify to Crane's enduring presence, here he is in the 1960s Pantheon, the cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. That's him, slightly and perhaps appropriately obscured, just above McCartney's Mop Top and between William S. Burroughs and Stan Laurel. When Crane is just 19, he writes a shocking tale about life in New York's tenement slums. Maggie, Girl of the Streets. Publishers at first would have nothing to do with it. It was too real. Crane used a pen name, Johnston Smith, because he didn't want to tarnish his own name or offend his prudish relatives. At 21, reporting freelance for New York's most powerful newspapermen, McClure, Pulitzer, and Hearst, Crane pens hundreds of firsthand city accounts of city life, many of them so good they stand on equal footing with his literary work. His subject is life in the real world. His narrators are physically immersed in the telling, often a violent and precarious situation, and he captures an immediacy that his contemporaries, like Henry James, did not want to or could not do. For a piece called An Experiment in Misery, Crane dresses as a tramp and spends a night in a Bowery flophouse. You can tell nothing, he says, of how a homeless man feels unless you are in that condition yourself. For the Men in the Storm, Crane stands in a blizzard, half frozen outside a charity house with homeless men waiting for the doors to open to get a hot meal. He writes, they pressed close to one another like sheep in a winter's gale, keeping one another warm by the heat of their bodies. Occasionally, some man whose ears and nose tingled acutely from the cold winds would wriggle down until his head was protected by the shoulders of his companions. It's an intimate account. And Crane visits an opium den and smokes a pipe himself, to reveal the subterranean world of the fallen, those who had been driven underground. He treats the experience almost scientifically, with detachment, no moral judgment, and even some humor, like this. When a man arises from his first trial of the pipe, the nausea that clutches him is something that can give cards and spades and big casino to seasickness. If he had swallowed a live chimney sweep, he could not feel more like dying. These firsthand accounts are hard work, but the public loved them so much, newspapers made social experiments a regular feature. Tellingly, in all of Crane's reporting, he refuses to take a superior moral stance. Unlike the reformists of his day, he never wags a finger in disdain. At around the same time, Crane conjures two collections of the strangest, most savage poems of the 19th century, which depart so far from traditional verse making, they scarcely seem to count as poetry at all, but they are unforgettable. Here's from the Black Riders. In the desert, I saw a creature, naked, bestial, who, squatting upon the ground, held his heart in his hands and ate of it. I said, is it good, friend? It is bitter, bitter, he answered, but I like it because it is bitter and because it is my heart. Here, Crane could be said to be giving birth to literary modernism, and he's only 22. The Red Badge of Courage is fictional evidence of Crane's modernism. It's not a potboiler about youthful heroism. It's not really a book about the Civil War at all, though it does treat parts of the Battle of Chancellorsville, but it shows no interest in the causes or outcome of that war, no interest in politics, no interest in tactics or strategy. There's not one mention of Abraham Lincoln or the struggle to preserve the Union, not a single word about slavery. Red Badge gives us only parts of a battle seen from the naive view of a new volunteer. Yet through this character, the helpless terror of modernity emerges. The waiting, the endless drilling, the incomprehension, the rumor and frustration, the anxiety, the fatigue, the panic, and hatred, not only of the enemy, but of officers, and the sense of betrayal by commanders. This is not the kind of novel that readers in 1895 expected or understood. It may be a short book, but it's a challenging read. No subplots, no love story, no focus on individual events, no social message. What makes it a classic is its audacious rendering of a surreal landscape, the authenticity of men in battle, and the penetrating, awkward, scared thoughts inside an adolescent's head. Mere facts are ruthlessly excluded. Small wonder that publishers are reticent to publish such an oddity written by a 23-year-old. It languishes in the slush pile. At this point, the best Crane can do is sell an occasional story or article, but publishers pay him as little as they can, and still no one will touch the scandalous Maggie. He's in serious need of money. Miraculously, an interview in New York press appears with none other than the doyen of American letters, William Dean Howells. Mr. Howells proclaims, "There is one novelist I have great hopes of. His name is Stephen Crane, and his novel Maggie is a remarkable book." High praise, but still no publisher. Panicking, Stephen decides to self-publish Maggie. He borrows the money to print 1,100 copies, but only one bookshop consents to sell it, buying 12 copies, returning 10. Stephen uses most of the rest for kindling. Christie's auction house estimates that 38 of these first editions are extant today. I hope you still got yours. Stephen's 23rd year is very hard. He's broke. He finished writing Red Badge a year before, but McClure, who said he was interested, sits on it for 6 months doing nothing. And Irving Batchelor of the New York Syndicate pays him just $90 for a drastically abridged version. And for the newspaper. The installments will run in 12 newspapers around the country, but Stephen can hardly live on this. He shares an unheated apartment at Manhattan's Art Students League with 3 other artists who pool their money to ensure they all get almost enough to eat. They eat so much potato salad, they can't stand it any longer. That's him sharing a bed. But those syndicated installments attract attention. The editor of the Philadelphia Press, Talcott Williams, who later becomes the first director of the Columbia School of Journalism, writes, "If this Mr. Crane stays true to his best impulses, he is likely to gain recognition as the most powerful of American tellers of tales." And just as Stephen is at the end of his tether, a pioneer of modernism, the English critic Edward Garnett, who also elevated D.H. Lawrence, Joseph Conrad, Naomi Mitchison, and Henry Green, convinces an editor at D. Appleton Publishing to give Red Badge due consideration. True to young Stephen's inveterate bad luck, when Appleton actually decides to publish the novel, he is nowhere to be found. He'd left New York on assignment, a newspaper trip to the American South, West, and Mexico, funded by Irving Batchelor's syndicate. But now, with some dough in his pocket and new impressions everywhere, Stephen is unconfined. His dispatches, 14 articles in 4 months, are breathless, a blow-by-blow yarn about Mardi Gras, tales of horseback in Texas brush country, a scintillating report of Nebraskans caught in the havoc of drought, and he pens the rudiments of later masterpieces, a card game with a suicidal Swede, the Blue Hotel, arriving with his bride in a sleepy western town to confront the gunslinger named Scratchy. The bride comes to Yellow Sky, and escaping sure death pursued by a posse of vengeful Mexicans, 1- horses. And while Stephen's on the Mesquite Trail in spurs and sombrero, all around the US and in the United Kingdom, Red Badge, just published, is killing it. An international bonanza. Stephen doesn't know it yet, but he's become overnight a literary rock star, the most famous American writer of the moment. When Crane finally learns of Red Badge's success, he boards a train back to New York with big expectations. But there, trouble awaits. Habitually restless, Crane goes looking for material in the city's infamous Tenderloin. The name was coined by the police because of the easy bribes they can get there. I'd been eating chuck, but now tenderloin. It's known for its dance halls, gambling dens, confidence men, and prostitutes. Satan's circus. One night, Crane observes a policeman arresting a streetwalker for soliciting. He wants his graft. She tells him, take a hike. Crane steps in and defends her. Why do that? Because chivalrous Stephen knows the charge to be false. He'd been conducting interviews that entire evening with dance hall girls, Dora Clark among them. She's simply being harassed, a common practice by Tenderloin police. Beat it, kid. But Crane doesn't back down. And a rock star gets hauled down to the Jefferson Market precinct. He gives testimony. And before you can say Crane risked all to save a woman, the yellow press smears his name. Even Crane's friend, City Police Commissioner Theodore Roosevelt, a red badge admirer, ends their relationship peremptorily. Crane's apartment is raided. He's stalked by police, and life in New York becomes untenable. His reputation on tenterhooks. He flees to Jacksonville, Florida, and there takes up with the proprietress of an elegant bawdy house, Cora Taylor, and they move in together. She soon becomes the most important person in Crane's life, a woman who spurns convention and hypocrisy as thoroughly as he does. But then he's commissioned again by Irving Bachelor to go to Cuba to report on the uprising against Spanish rule. Crane jumps at the offer, leaving Cora behind, and embarks on a very dangerous mission to sneak into Cuba by smuggling ammunition to the rebels. He boards an old steamer, the Commodore, disguised as a crew member. But when that creaky tug hits open sea, it takes on water and then founders. Crane and 3 companions spend 30 harrowing hours in a small rowboat in the presence of sharks, rowing and bailing with all their strength to prevent being capsized, toward the shore, then out again, then in again into rough surf, and out to sea again to figure out a better way in. People on shore wave to them, but no one sends help. They nearly drown in the rough surf off the Florida coast, from which derives one of America's greatest factual tales of fiction, Stephen Crane's The Open Boat. Crane was done in by the time he washed ashore, utterly drained. After a period of rest, he and Cora slip out of town, return to New York, and book cabins on the Cunard line for England, in part to avoid an American scandal of connubial relations in their out-of-wedlock marriage. Just as they're settling in for a new life in England, Hearst contacts Crane, hiring him to cover the vicious little war between Greece and Turkey, and to finally witness real battle close up. He and Cora go to Athens as a team. When they finally get to the front, both of them, she's the war's first woman correspondent, write daily, probing accounts of this horrible Greco-Turkish conflict. Crane's A Fragment of Velestino, a vicious battle, can be read as a work of literature, a nonfiction version of the Red Badge of Courage. Here's a taste. I noticed one lieutenant standing up in the rear of a trench rolling a cigarette, his lips wide apart. In this careless attitude, a shot went through his neck. His servant came from the trench and knelt weeping over the body, regardless of the battle. The men had to drag him in by the legs. After 2 months in Greece, the Cranes are at the limit of what they can bear. They return to England and rent a house south of London in a damp hollow, hardly a place for a man with weak lungs. Shaken by the brutality of what he witnessed in Greece, Stephen completes his second volume of poetry, War is Kind. It's complex, ironic, wrenching. I must read you its opening poem. Do not weep, maiden, for war is kind, because your lover threw wild hands toward the sky, and the affrighted steed ran on alone. Do not weep, war is kind. Hoarse, booming drums of the regiment, little souls who thirst for fight. These men were born to drill and die. The unexplained glory flies above them. Great is the battle god, great and his kingdom, a field where 1,000 corpses lie. Do not weep, babe, for war is kind. Because your father tumbled in the yellow trenches, raged at his breast, gulped, and died. Do not weep, war is kind. Swift blazing flag of the regiment, eagle with crest of red and gold. These men were born to drill and die. Point for them the virtue of slaughter. Make plain to them the excellence of killing, and a field where 1,000 corpses lie. Mother, whose heart hung humble as a button on the bright, splendid shroud of your son, do not weep. War is kind. The entire volume is like that. Intimate, blunt, piteous. It whispers, I would console you if I honestly could. Still, Stephen and Cora's money problems deepen and threaten to overwhelm them. That same year, the U.S. battleship Maine explodes in Havana Harbor. Crane is called upon to cover what looks like inevitable war with Spain, thanks in part to the yellow press. He ships out while Cora stays home to fend off creditors. He lands first in New York, then on to Cuba, but the U.S. naval blockade aims to cut off Spanish supplies, making it nearly impossible for journalists to cross. As is his wont, Crane sneaks onto a ship with the U.S. Marines bound for Guantanamo Bay. He's now embedded with the troops. Here he is, second from the left, white hat band. He shows himself willing to serve in battle, carrying messages to company commanders, and he garners a reputation for bravery under fire, dubbed a hero by the Marine Corps. He's 27. When he returns to Cora, he's renowned but totally worn out and weak from yellow fever. The creditors are still sending writ after writ. To save money, the couple moves south to Sussex, to a drafty medieval manor house, Breed Place. The Cranes like it here. It's a sunny moment in their difficult and danger-strewn life, and together they cast a magnificent pose as country baron and baroness with their gardens, horses, and 5 dogs. Here, too, Stephen plugs away, as he always has, working constantly, sending articles and stories, while pleading to be paid with agents and publishers. As hosts, Stephen and Cora are open-armed, entertaining all manner of visitors, including the orbit of celebrity English and expat writers Joseph Conrad, H.G. Wells, Ford Madox Ford, and Henry James, who's crazy about Cora. They anoint Stephen Baron Breed. At the end of the year 1899, Cora and he spend money they don't have to throw a grandiose party with an orchestra, amateur theatricals, and cots in the ballroom. Company stays for days. At the end of it, Stephen coughs up blood. 5 months later, at a sanatorium in the Black Forest, Germany, on June the 5th, 1900, Stephen Crane dies. He's 28. Paul Auster titles his 2021 biography, Burning Boy. Crane's life was a flame. I'd like to attempt to stoke it back to life. Stephen Crane takes his first breath on the Day of the Dead, November 1st, 1871, in a Methodist parsonage in Newark, New Jersey, the 9th surviving child of the 14 offspring born to his devout Methodist parents, Jonathan Townley Crane and Mary Helen Peck Crane. Stephen's father was an 1843 graduate of the College of New Jersey, now Princeton University, a scholar, abolitionist, and prolific writer of reformist tracts. On receiving his doctorate of divinity, he's picked to be the principal of Pennington Seminary, forerunner of the Pennington School. Dr. Crane's 8 years at Pennington are especially noteworthy. He forms alliances that enhance school finances. He helps found the school's first literary society and opens the institution to women, known thereafter as the Pennington Seminary and Female Collegiate Institute. He was, by all accounts, a beloved headmaster, friend, and counselor to students, yet an uncompromising proponent of the seminary's tradition and philosophy of Methodism. At this point, I must say a word about a town that becomes important to our account. The town known as the summer Mecca of Methodism. As part of the late 19th century American spiritualist movement, Reverend Elwood Stokes and Reverend Aaron Ballard, both members of the Pennington Seminary's Board of Trustees, go to the Jersey Shore in the summer of 1869 and find the perfect spot where God would have a place for his church by the sea, apart from objectionable worldly creatures. They create a Methodist community and name it Ocean Grove. Methodists head there in droves, seeking fellowship, communal worship, and a relaxing place by the sea. They buy plots, pitch tents, and build open-air shelters called tabernacles. Reverend Stokes becomes the first president of the Ocean Grove Camp Meeting Association. The community becomes known as the Queen of Religious Resorts, and Jonathan and Helen Crane purchase a lot here. The camp is still thriving, as you may know, the longest active camp meeting site in the United States. Another distinguished member of the Pennington Seminary Board is a wealthy Manhattan brush manufacturer, James A. Bradley, himself a member of the Ocean Grove Camp Meeting Association. In 1871, he buys 500 acres of oceanfront just north of Ocean Grove and establishes a town, which he names after America's first Methodist bishop, Francis Asbury. In just a few years, Asbury Park is where Stephen Crane will live with his mother and begin his career as a journalist. Let's return to Pennington Seminary. In the 1850s, a major function of the seminary was to train young men for the ministry. And that's pretty much the focus when Stephen goes here. In 1887, out of a total school enrollment of 312, the ministerial preparatory department has 90 students. Women graduate with a degree as mistress of English literature or mistress of liberal arts, which qualifies them for careers as stenographers, typists, librarians, artists, and educators. For all students, male and female, Pennington Seminary is not without its rigor. Chapel is compulsory 2 times a day. Bible class on Sunday afternoon. Prayer meeting Wednesday night. Sundays are solemn. All secular activities, even walking for pleasure, are forbidden. The school fosters a strict churchly atmosphere. No profanity, no smoking, no drinking, no going to places of entertainment, no playing at games of chance, no terramomo for almond croissant, and no Vito's Pizza. God forbid. Hard to imagine young Stephen complying. He loves Vito's, especially on Sunday. That's where he'd be today. And he's an incessant smoker, a passion he joyfully and recklessly pursues. His mother wrote, Stephen could not talk unless he was walking up and down the room with a cigarette balanced on his lips. He's an avid card player too. Post-Pennington, he'd be at the gambling table many a night, all night, from which one might conclude he felt most fully active taking risks. The seminary's rules are subconsciously absorbed, yet consciously rejected by the teenage Crane. His boyish rebellion at what he once termed the Methodist holy show at Ocean Grove is translated into many of his stories where drinking and profanity come center stage. In Maggie, Girl of the Streets, Maggie's bellicose brother, Jimmy, waxes philosophical on a certain starlit evening and says wonderingly and quite reverently, "The moon looks like hell, don't it?" But there is one aspect of Methodism, its goal of enriching the whole person, that nurtures Stephen Crane for sure. The school's very good athletic program becomes a saving grace. Stephen loves sports, and in his time here, he played on the seminary football and baseball team against the Princeton Freshmen, the Petty Institute, Lawrenceville, and Lambertville. Here's Crane, front row center, the catcher on a very good Syracuse University baseball team. His teammates said he played with fiendish glee. That's Stephen Crane. Perhaps more important than sports to young Crane's development was Pennington's stress on proficiency in the written and spoken word. Students were drilled in composition and required to read essays aloud. Crane more than likely pursued the 3-year English course, and thus the evidence is persuasive that young Crane was encouraged here to test his writing skills. Unfortunately, there are no longer any records of the courses that Crane took at Pennington, nor of the grades he received. What the archive does tell us is that Stephen spent 4 semesters here from the fall of 1885 to the fall of 1887. Why only 2 years? We can only guess. But there may be truth to a story told by Stephen's brother Wilbur in his memoir, which goes more or less like this. While at Pennington Seminary, wrote Wilbur, some hazing was done, which one of the professors charged to Stephen. He denied any knowledge of it. And when the professor told him he lied, Stephen went to his room, packed his trunk, and went home to Asbury Park, where he told his story, adding that, quote, as the professor called me a liar, there was not room in Pennington for us both, so I came home, end quote. Nothing would induce him to return to the seminary. This account could well be apocryphal. We'll never know for sure. But what we can infer is that Stephen Crane's sense of honor, truth, and principle was honed at the tender age of 15 in both positive and negative ways at Pennington Seminary. And what we can certainly intuit from Stephen's overall academic record is that Stephen never liked school anyway. After Pennington, he goes to Claverack Institute, a military school. He's 17, an awkward age. Here he is again in the rank and file, middle row, third from right. But even though he rose in rank to lieutenant and then captain, he lasts just 2 years at Claverack and does not graduate. When he goes next to Lafayette College, he leaves after 1 semester, and then he drops out of Syracuse University after 5 months, but not before starring on the baseball team. If any one institution had a positive influence on Stephen's development, it was his mother. You didn't think I'd overlook Crane's mother, did you? Given the length and focus of my talk, however, I have just time to say that Helen Peck Crane was from a family of Methodist royalty, immersed in the intellectual and social pursuits of the time. She earned a college degree. She published articles and stories. She wrote leaflets and became a leading voice for the Women's Christian Temperance Union. She also played a pivotal role in earning women the right to vote in local school board elections. And when her husband dies suddenly in 1880, and Helen has to leave the parsonage, she moves with Stephen and her daughter Agnes from town to town, ultimately settling in Asbury Park, Arbutus House at 508 4th Avenue. You can still visit. It's now a Crane museum. When he's 8 years old, the prodigy writes a poem, I'd Rather Have, here in his legible round hand. Last Christmas, they gave me a sweater and a nice warm suit of wool, but I'd rather be cold and have a dog to watch when I come home from school. Father gave me a bicycle, but that isn't much of a treat unless you have a dog at your heels racing away down the street. They bought me a camping outfit, but a bonfire by a log is all the outfit I would ask if I only had a dog. They seem to think a little dog is a killer of all earth's joys, but oh, that pesky little dog means hours of joy to the boys. Despite the charm of childish rhymes, lines like, they seem to think a little dog is a killer of all earth's joys, are a bit unsettling. The man who's later known for audacity was already at 8, sniping at the world. When Stephen turns 13, Helen sends him to Pennington Seminary, his father's former school. And every summer, Stephen returns to Asbury Park to stay with Mom. And it's in this seaside town where Crane cuts his professional teeth, composing gossipy squibs for his brother Townley. Older than Stephen by 18 years, Townley Crane runs a local news bureau for the New York Tribune, supplying that paper with news from the summer resorts. In the 1880s, mid-June to mid-September, hundreds of thousands crowded into Asbury Park for the beach and boardwalk, of course, but also to see and be seen. It's an ideal spot for a cub reporter to learn his trade. And you can imagine Stevie Crane hustling along the boardwalk on his bicycle or lurking in hotel lobbies as he tracks down tidbits. Most of his summer articles are unsigned, but scholars attribute many to him based on the thumbprint of his prose. To wit, the city maidens and their gallant attendants have blossomed out in blazer jackets with caps to match, which make them look like huge potato bugs, etc. The young reporter's mockery is refreshing, as are his jabs at bourgeois convention. But as young Crane starts to mature, his jabs become barbed, and he occasionally overdoes it. And boy, did he overdo it. It was August, a few months before Election Day, and a workers' organization, the Junior Order of United American Mechanics, was to parade through the streets of Asbury Park. Townley wanted to go fishing that day, so he asks his 20-year-old brother to cover the event. What should have been an innocuous little squib ends up getting Stephen banned from the New York Tribune, and believe it or not, he's blamed for tilting the 1892 US presidential election. Here's why. Whitelaw Reid owned the Tribune and was chosen by Benjamin Harrison, Republican presidential candidate, to be his running mate. Here's what Stephen wrote. There were hundreds of members of the order, and they wound through the streets to the music of enough brass bands to make furious discords. It probably was the most awkward, ungainly, uncut, and uncarved procession that ever raised clouds of dust on sun-beaten streets. And that's one of the milder passages. To be fair, Crane aims most of his satire at the well-dressed onlookers, quote, to whom a dollar, when held close to the eye, often shuts out any impression they may have had that other people possess rights. In the workers, he sees honesty in their faces, calling them men who possessed principles. But these fine distinctions are too fine. The mechanics take offense, calling the article un-American, demanding an apology from the Tribune. The Democrats pile on, attacking Whitelaw Reid as anti-labor. The Tribune issues a second apology, but the Democrats won't relent, denouncing the Harrison Reid ticket at every whistle stop for their disdain of the working class. Stephen and Townley get the sack. And as far as the Tribune is concerned, Stephen is persona non grata. It's a former graduate of the Pennington Seminary who helps Crane get back on his feet. Here's Willis Fletcher Johnson, the Tribune's day editor, a former friend of Crane's father who is still involved with the Pennington Alumni Association. Although Crane would never work for the Tribune again, Johnson tells the boy it's not the end of the world and shares advice. A man with your talent, he tells Stephen, ought not waste his time reporting that the flunky Smiths of Squedunk are at the gilded Piazza Hotel for the season. Stephen accordingly pivots to more ambitious work and completes his manuscript of Maggie. For the Pennington students here today, take note of Pennington alumnus Willis Fletcher Johnson. In your time at this fine school, never lose sight of the men and women you meet. One never knows, they may one day help you big time. To conclude, I want to tell you why I believe Crane deserves a high place in the American literary pantheon. It begins with Crane's intuitive artistry, his gift for translating the visual world into sharp, seeable word pictures, using remarkable similes. The fog was as cold as wet clothes. The sky was bare and blue and hurt like brass. Hubert Crane would make a harridan mother stir up a room until her children were bobbing about like bubbles. This is Impressionism, elevating a scene or subject beyond realism. And Crane's emotive use of color adds to this pointillist style. A dog has yellow famine in his eyes. Jimmy Johnson lives some red years. George Kelsey is a brown young man. The Blue Hotel, the Red Badge, Yellow Sky, Black Riders, etc. His biographer, Paul Auster, calls Crane a human tuning fork for how he evokes emotion from sound, faces, and scenery. None of them knew the color of the sky. It's the opening line of The Open Boat. 4 men are in danger of drowning, rowing and bailing to save their lives, and they are fixated by what's directly in front of them, filled with anxiety about the waves. We readers are forced to register the awful scale of what's to come. Their eyes glanced level and were fastened upon the waves that swept toward them. These waves were of the hue of slate, save for the tops, which were of foaming white, and all of the men knew the colors of the sea. Crane obliges the reader to enter the boat. This corpse lay upon his back staring at the sky. He was dressed in an awkward suit of yellowish brown. The youth could see that the soles of his shoes had been worn to the thinness of writing paper, and from a great rent in one, the dead foot projected piteously, and it was as if fate had betrayed the soldier. In death, it exposed to his enemies that poverty which in life he had perhaps concealed from his friends. The ranks opened covertly to avoid the corpse, the invulnerable dead man forced away for himself. The youth looked keenly at the ashen face. The wind raised the tawny beard. It moved as if a hand were stroking it. All of Crane's powers of defamiliarization are at work here. The corpse is inert, but active, betrayed and poverty-stricken, but also invulnerable and forcing the ranks of the living to part. And its tawny beard is lifted by the wind in a gesture of extraordinary intimacy. It moved as if a hand were stroking it. More than anything else, it establishes the dead soldier's uncanniness for us. Crane's writing is uncanny, with hyper-real detail that thrums with an odd-angled slant to his syntax. He sketches a scene or character by refracting what is happening or who they are, so that it's not just what is seen, but what is felt. That's what Crane is after. While writing, I can't advance the pictures. While riding the Red Badge of Courage, Crane would go to his, and I'd like to show this picture. So, sorry. That's a second edition.
Try again.
Thank you. Good. While riding the Red Badge of Courage, Crane would go to his friend's studio and sprawl out on the divan, reading memoirs of Union War veterans. His friend writes, "One day, Stephen suddenly tossed aside a magazine in exhausted patience and stood up. I wonder that some of these fellows don't tell how they felt in those scraps. They spout eternally of what they did, but they are as emotionless as rocks." Crane demands to get the feelings right for whatever setting or character he's describing, and thus achieves for me the fecundity of life. At the zenith of his fame, Crane writes the following to a friend. "A man is born into the world with his own pair of eyes, and he is not at all responsible for his vision. He is merely responsible for his quality of personal honesty. To keep close to this personal honesty is my supreme ambition." Then he pauses, reflecting on the statement's egotism, adding, "I, however, do not say that I am honest. I merely say that I am as nearly honest as weak mental machinery will allow. A man is sure to fail at it, but there is something in the failure." The supreme ambition is personal honesty, yet he admits he fails at it. Yet also there is something in the failure. He draws satisfaction from the mere striving. In Crane's heyday, the 1890s, an emerging approach to literature was taking hold, naturalism. It was in reaction to the prevailing genre, realism. Realists aim to show the world, society, and nature as it really is, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But the naturalists claim the realists failed by delineating the world not as it is, but as it could be. Their truth was fictionalized. They may set out to delineate an unembellished reality, but instead, according to the naturalists, realists created and invented biased reality due to their subjectivity, their bourgeois values, their conventional temperament, their moral judgment. And thus they unintentionally failed to tackle deeply entrenched inequalities in society. The leading proponent of naturalism, French novelist Émile Zola, whom Crane read, aimed to straighten things out in a high-handed way. Quote, "A novelist must be only an analyst, an anatomist, and the work must have the certainty and practical application of a work of science, photographic, quasi-documentary. Naturalism would depict individuals, often the poor and uneducated, determined by their birth and environment, victims of circumstance who are bereft of any meaningful choice in an unfair and constrained society, even in a meaningless universe. It's no surprise that Crane's work was praised and still is as representative of naturalism. But I think that's off the mark. Yes, Crane depicted the urban poor, the battlefield, the laboring class, the marginalized, in vivid narratives with an unmatched sense of immediacy. Sounds like naturalism. And if you needed any more rationale, there's Crane's Open Boat, individuals fighting for their lives against indifferent nature. But I posit there's something in Crane's characterizations that distinguishes work within the naturalist movement. Despite his character's circumstances and often futile struggles, they possess and act on human values. It is their will, their reason, and yes, their compassion that give them dignity. The homeless men in the snowstorm, warm their companions. The youth in red badge feels burning shame for leaving the tattered soldier to die. In Maggie, the slum is a moral universe unto itself, where of necessity, individuals strive for self-esteem. Even in the Open Boat, Crane stresses the subtle brotherhood of men who row and bail together to surmount the fierce elements. Crane may fail to attain his supreme ambition of personal honesty, but his striving underscores important differences. There is something in the failure. Crane's characters refute their victimization by doing the right thing, even in the face of meaninglessness. Crane's version of honesty is to respect and have affection for these people, however cast out or confused they may be. Am I suggesting that Crane's moral acuity has its source in Pennington Seminary and his experience here? Some questions are meant not to be answered. Though his own physical existence was often punishing, pushing his strength beyond what it could bear, and though Crane put himself under tremendous emotional strain, he found a place as an author where that strength and strain came out in spontaneous, personalized, imaginative expression. When reading Crane, I hear Orwell's Days of Down and Out, Joseph Mitchell at McSorley's Ale House, A.J. Liebling and Martha Gellhorn embedded on a D-Day landing craft. Immersive, you are there, personalized new journalism, which Crane practiced long years before it had a name. Mailer, Capote, Didion, Hunter Thompson, Stephen Crane paved the way. His potential was cut short, but at the top of his game, he came as close to nature and truth as any writer could. In his best writing, there is unsurpassable beauty, and he modernized journalism and the American novel. It's hard to think of another American writer ablaze with such accomplishment in just a 10-year career. I hope today we've been able to keep that ember alive a little bit longer. Thank you. Oh. Thank you.
That was wonderful. And we have questions, I think, from the audience, and Kim is going to go around with a microphone if anyone has some questions for Eric.
Fire away.
I have the laptop with me so that people can hear you at home, but the camera is off, so you will not be on camera. It's just so people can hear your question. So anyone with any questions? Well, Eric, I think you did such a good job that no one has any other questions for you.
We close the book.
Oh, we have.
Oh, wait, we have someone right here. I feel like I'm the Price is Right or something.
First of all, it was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Secondly, Eric is our shortstop on our softball team. So Tim, the coach, and myself are here, and we salute you, sir. Anyway, I read his parting words before he died were, "Sir, I am a man." What did he mean by that?
I think he's humble. I think he didn't consider himself any more than ordinary, even though everybody around him could see his genius. I believe some of the words in his closing, his deathbed words were very gentle. And here is a man who had a fiery heart and fiery blood, had a gentle resolution. I am merely a man. I believe that's what he would mean. I can't speak for Stephen, but he really did identify with lower classes, with people who were down and out. He never really put himself, he was always in his stories, always in his books, but he was never identified. He was either the Easterner or the correspondent or just a presence in the room. So he had humility, I think, and I believe that's what he meant by I'm a man. He's a very young one.
Yeah.
Anyone else? I do have a number of questions from the audience online, but I think I might have to sit down.
Sure.
I need more arms and well, let's see. Oh, thank you. So Kathy has a comment and a question. Ambrose Bierce, I heard, criticized Crane as being not masculine enough. Jealous, didn't respond to the compassion and passion? What do you think?
Not masculine enough. Well, he did fancy himself at the end of his life as a bit of a fop. But he was a baseball player. He liked football. I'm not sure what Ambrose Bierce didn't have many kind things to say about anybody.
All right, Julia has a question. What did Cora do after Stephen passed away?
She became the executor of his estate and had to borrow lots of money from Stephen's family and brothers. And she handled his literary estate as well. She was very involved with Breed Place. She went to Germany with him to the Black Forest. I don't know the rest.
All right, well, that sounds, you knew a lot. You know a lot.
No.
Here's a question. Looks like it's from a family member of yours. Can you comment on what Crane would think by the banning of the book, Red Badge of Courage?
By the banning of it?
The banning of it.
Well, Maggie was boycotted by so many. Maggie was published in 1896 after Red Badge was published. No one would touch Maggie. And it's just too real. There's a brutality there. It's not sordid, but it's sordid. It's a sordid life. There's no sex in it, and that was a popular trope in the 1890s. Maggie has some dignity. I mean, she is naive in many ways, but Maggie's the one that's banned. Red Badge, I don't see why it would be banned except by the Department of Defense.
Oh, wow. Fritzy is wondering, Eric, what was it about Crane that pulled you into his passion and his work?
Thank you for that. Well, it goes back many, many years. I was trying to figure out when I first was interested. It must be 40 years ago. I was living in New York City and in the Lower East Side, and I actually in the East Side, in East Village. And I used to walk the Bowery, and I read Maggie, and I read The Open Boat, and I just found his style of writing accessible and yet elevated. I also thought about his endeavors with the New York police, which I read about. And I used to go up to Columbia University and get the microfiche and look at the old New York World headlines about it and read about Stephen's interactions with them. His high sense of integrity, absolute integrity. This personal honesty was very, very important to him. You know, he left in a huff from this school because someone called him a liar. And I started to write a screenplay based on Sidney Lumet's The Prince of the City, but it was about Maggie and the endeavor that Stephen had with the police department, the corrupt police department. And I melded the two stories, the sordid life of the slums in the Bowery with the run-in he had with the police and defending this prostitute. I just feel Crane has a great lust for life. And look, in 28 years, he did so much. And I love the fact that he was an athlete. I don't know, I mean, I've always found him just inspiring. And I once was at a retreat for our kids in upstate, at Blairstown, upstate New Jersey. And I ran into a fellow who also had children at the same school. And he was a Crane scholar, Michael Robertson. And we were talking about Crane, and it was wonderful to bond with somebody else. And he wrote a wonderful book about Crane's journalism. And it just furthered my interest.
Do you know, Eric, if there's been a biopic of Crane's life? And if not, who would you cast to play him in a movie? It's a very popular question from famous people here.
Christian Bale.
Christian Bale. A
Maybe.
younger Christian Bale.
Sean Penn. I don't think there is a biopic. There is a reenactment that's done at Crane House, An Evening with Stephen Crane. And there are actors who actually, it's ongoing. So there are actors who act like him and read from his books and reenact his escapades.
Oh, next library program. There is someone who's wondering, Bonnie is wondering if you've came across in your research any notable interaction between Crane and Mark Twain.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear from Bonnie and from Kathy and from Fritzy. Hi, everybody. Repeat the question again, please.
Yes. Through your research, did you come across any notable interaction between Crane and Mark Twain?
Well, there is a great ear for dialect. Crane is a master, and so is Mark Twain. Twain was older than Crane. I'm sure Crane read some Twain. That's a hard question. I haven't thought about that. It's a good question.
Some food for thought.
Yeah, Twain too was, looking at a side of life that wasn't really represented in many of the novels of the mid-20th century, mid-19th century, and the Victorian era. So Twain is looking at Jim and Huck as they float down the river, and the episodes there, and Crane too is looking at people in the subterranean world.
We have someone, Richard, who said, would you call Crane a muckraker, in quotes? I realize he wasn't into moralizing, but he certainly exposed the underside and the cruelty of the modern world.
My understanding of muckraker, though, are the newspapermen at the time, the McClures and the Pulitzers and the Hearsts, who were looking for sensation. They were the yellow journalists who were getting a rise out of things. Yes, they might have been looking at the more prurient aspects of city life. And maybe that was part of the sensation. I don't think Crane was looking to make a living at this. So he was trying to please his publishers. And if he could get some articles that were read and that created readership, he was more than happy to do it. Crane wrote high and low. He was often really hard up for money and no one was paying him much money. So he occasionally just wrote to churn it out. And he might have been a muckraker in that regard and looking at, at opium dens. I mean, the opium piece is really wonderful in that there was a hysteria about widespread opium, which was legal at the time, but the Chinese were bringing it in, and there were more white people than Asian people who were smoking opium. And Crane wanted to do this as an assignment. Unlike a lot of his reputation, he was not a drug person. He was not a big drinker. He liked smoking cigarettes, and he did like women. But he was trying to get to the truth of things. So he was trying to quell the hysteria by showing that people would not become instantly addicted and not expose themselves to certain death, which was what many thought would happen if you did expose yourself to opium. So, he was doing some types of muckraking in that regard.
Eric, I think I have two more for you. This is a very interesting comment and question from Eric Lehman. It's interesting that Crane is seen as an avatar of naturalism, but naturalism is often criticized as lacking objective moral values. As you point out, Crane's characters seem to refute the idea through their compassionate actions towards fellow humans. Do you think that his work had a moral center in this compassion and human connection?
Well, that was my point. I do think he differs from Emile Zola's sense of being photographic or being purely scientific, being totally detached and leaving facts out, whereas Crane has a lot of heart. And even though you'll never see, he detaches himself from his stories, he tries to get to the essence. Yeah, I mean, the hardest part of this piece to write, this talk, was to show the difference between realism and naturalism. Naturalism is a very slippery thing. On one hand, it's about your environment, about your circumstances. And many naturalists said that we should be writing to show people who did not have any free will, who were totally bereft of any type of choice, any type of meaningful choice or change, and to be totally brutal about this kind of writing. And I think they failed at it. I think Zola fails at it as well. But Crane was different in that Crane did try to find a moral center. He was not punitive, though. He did not look down on anybody. Whereas I think there was a more moral judgment and a moral evaluation being made by some of the realist writers who would end optimistically or end in a way what's called a monitory theme, admonishing people. If you stop smoking that opium, you'll get your life together. But so it's a hard question. I think Crane's naturalism is different. I was trying to come up with a word for it, like a compassionate realist or I don't know. I was trying to come up with some type of moniker for him, but I decided it was not safe to do that. It's a really difficult discussion as to what realism is, because some of the realists themselves were behind the scenes. We're trying to get it as right as possible. Flaubert was one of them. And they write some beautiful work, which does not cast judgment. So, yeah. I hope, Eric, that I've answered that.
Eric, I'm going to close from the at-home audience with a last question from your friend Jean. You said Crane was a good baseball player. Could he go from first to third on a single to center like you can?
Yeah. Thanks, Jean. Come back, Jean. We need you.
And a lot more lovely comments, Eric, on what a tremendous program, presentation this has been. The at-home audience is very happy with what they've heard. So thank you from the at-home audience.
Thank you.
We have time to more questions from the audience.
Eric,
Sure,
it looks like we may
please.
have a request for another question from your friend right here.
All right, I'm going to undermine the whole good moment here.
Thanks very much.
Hey,
This
Mark.
was, I told you this was a long trip coming down here. This was definitely worth it. So I'm very grateful I made the trip from Long Island here by the train connections this morning. One thing that I sensed as you were talking about this was you've pulled so much together here. And it's not only an acquaintance with Stephen Crane, but with other authors. And I'm just, as I was sitting here taking it in, I just wondered, you said you were interested in Crane from way back when, but in terms of pulling your presentation together, how long did you spend on this? Did you spend years on this? I mean, had this started like years ago and you putting notes together?
Well, I mean, one thing that's interesting is that I have over the years, I read, what's interesting is Crane dies in 1900 and is sort of forgotten by the world. And for the next 20 years, he is forgotten. He is not written about. Nobody comes to champion him. And in around 1921, I believe, a fellow named Thomas Beer, who was a fiction writer and a newspaper writer, decides to write a biography. And Joseph Conrad writes a beautiful introduction to this biography, which he says that that the years are muddied over by the sands of time, by the dirt of time. And what a wonderful thing for a kindred spirit, somebody he loved, to suddenly be pulled out from the mud and to shown the light of day. And yet they find out that Beer's account is totally apocryphal. He made up most of Crane's life. He wrote letters that were not true. And yet it restored him to some visibility. And then John Berryman, he taught at Princeton for a while, he's a poet, wrote a biography in 1950 that really instantiated him back into the scholarly study. And very slowly, people started to get interested in him. And I read Berryman's biography. Now, Berryman committed suicide at a very young age, and a lot of the biography is almost rationale to why he should die young, like Crane. But Berryman is a wonderful, takes an analysis of Crane's art and looks at Crane's work, and was indebted to Thomas Beer. And then, over a long, long period of time, I've always admired the guy. It's very hard to know. I don't read Crane all the time, but I mean, also he's very accessible. He's written New York sketches. You can just look at his sketches. They're really short. He did an experiment in misery, experiment in luxury. He went all over and he did these little pieces. He goes to a coal mine. He goes to Sing Sing prison. He does these accounts that are really, really wonderful and accessible, and he just brings them to life. So, I don't know, he also has all these Western tales. Read The Bride Comes to Yellow Sky. It's a hoot. Read The Blue Hotel. It's a really peculiar piece. Some of the pieces in Mexico, he does a lot of writing about military. I don't know, he was really attracted to military subjects. His family said that he wanted to be a soldier. I don't really understand that side of him, but he writes a lot about the Civil War. He wrote a novel called Active Service. He wrote a beautiful story called The Upturned Face. He wrote a funny story about a fellow who, in a war, a soldier who volunteers to get somebody's thirsty, so he volunteers to run across the front line to get a water to bring back, and it was futile. He has a story named 5 White Mice about being in a Mexican town in Mexico City, and these guys are drinking, and they end up going down the wrong alleyway. And these Mexicans are there who don't want these gringos around, and the gringos are scared, but they have a gun, and they both sort of agree not to do anything. And the last line of the book is, nothing happened. So I just adore the guy. I just think he had a puckishness that was an interest in so many different things. He loved baseball, man. This guy had the essence of life.